On December 29th, 2019, during a Sunday morning service at West Freeway Church in White Settlement, Texas, a man stood up near the back of the sanctuary, approached a man standing near one of the back doors, and opened fire at point-blank range with a shotgun. Services were being live-streamed, so the shooting was broadcast as it occurred, and footage circulated widely online afterward. The gunman fatally shot two church members, 64-year-old Tony Wallace, a church deacon, and 67-year-old Richard White, a member of the church's volunteer security team. Immediately, screaming erupted and congregants scattered away from the gunfire. Within seconds, volunteer security team members inside the church drew their weapons in response. Jack Wilson, a 71-year-old former reserve deputy sheriff and head of the church security team, fired a single shot that hit and killed the shooter, ending the attack. The entire confrontation was over in just a few seconds. The gunman had attended the church before and had charitably been given food by the members. Sometime prior to the shooting, he had become angry when asking for money from the church and being told no. Following the shooting, police described the gunman as a person with a criminal and psychiatric history and somewhat transient lifestyle prior to the attack. The West Freeway congregation and broader community mourned the loss of the two men who were violently gunned down without warning during their Sunday morning worship service. A Tarrant County grand jury later declined to indict Jack Wilson for his actions, ruling his use of deadly force justified under Texas law. Despite what we might want to believe, attacks are far too common against Christian churches, even here in the United States. There have been almost 400 violent attacks on churches recorded in the U.S. since 2000, with aggression toward Bible-believing churches rising in the last handful of years. With opposition to Christians rising, trespassing, vandalism, and aggressive protests like the recent protest of a Christian church in Minneapolis by a group of obnoxious leftists, including the sodomite CNN host Don Lemon, the men of the church must start taking church security more seriously. We here in Ogden have personally experienced armed protesters waving flags, shouting, and barking at congregants like dogs on the front steps of our building during Sunday morning services, and it has caused us to significantly bolster our security team. Today, on the Brutal American Podcast, Ethan and I will walk through the philosophy and objectives we have developed for church security here at Refuge, as well as some of the pitfalls and lessons learned up to this point. We believe this is an extremely important topic for our day, and we hope it's helpful for you in your local church context. With that said, on with the show. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Brutal American. Thanks for joining us. Real quick before we jump into this, thank you to our patrons. Thank you guys so much for all the support. If you haven't checked out the Patreon yet, we've got a bunch of extra stuff going on over there. Behind the paywall, video stuff. We've done some shooting stuff at the range recently. And then also with every single one of these shows, we record an after hours that basically dives into a little bit more of the practical stuff that we're doing on the ground here in Ogden. So there's additional content there if you guys want to go check that out. Also, massive thanks to all of our sponsors here for the show. The patrons and the sponsors make this possible and allow us to do it. So huge thanks to them. And yeah, let's kind of roll right into this. This is something that we've actually discussed doing an episode on for a little while now. This has been on the docket for a bit, but
yeah, I think it's super relevant. It's something I wanted to talk about because of what we do here. Mm-hmm. But also we've had a lot of requests for this kind of thing. I think we've mentioned it enough, like just in passing with our security team and training and the church and how we do it. And so I think it's something that people have been asking for, and so we kind of seems timely given the state of affairs and given some of the recent kind of news events that have gone on in our country.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the church protest there in Minneapolis not too long ago, which in my opinion looks like Don Lemon was literally a part of the organizing and leading. I mean, he's going to deny that. And then, he's arrested for 24 hours or something and then released without bail. And like, it's all just a giant show. There's not going to be anything that happens to him. There's not going to be even probably a slap on the wrist. So it just goes to show you that this topic is extremely important. The people who are against us, especially faithful Bible-believing churches here in the West, like, you are the enemy. You are the last lone bulwark, as Stephen Wolfe would say, that is holding back moral insanity in the nation. And so you're under attack. You're going to be under attack.
And when you look at an event like this, what happened in Minnesota, nothing happened. Nobody got arrested. Obviously rights were violated, Constitution was violated. But like, I think, when they plan these things out and execute them, and then, it's kind of like rubbing your nose in it in terms of, look, we can do whatever we want.
With immunity.
We own we own the justice system. We own all the judges.
We own the media.
Nothing will happen. And it's to make you think and to make us think, they must not have done anything wrong. People can come in our church and interrupt our service. And maybe the First Amendment, doesn't actually apply anymore. Like maybe it's not what I learned in Schoolhouse Rock, or,
or even like you might recognize that there's an issue, but the entire deck is stacked against you. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There's nothing that you can do to defend yourself.
Or when this happens in your church, you're more worried about, what's going to happen to me? Obviously, nothing's going to happen to these guys, so they must not be breaking the law. So what's going to happen to me if I respond or shut the doors or kick somebody out? And it's just basically I think a psyop to make people cower and think like, no, I can't. There's nothing we can do about this.
And I mean, even before we get to facing some sort of opposition, I think it causes the guys standing in pulpits to pull punches and refuse to say the things that they actually believe, because they know that this is the kind of opposition that's going to show up at their front door if they start speaking out.
Yeah, and here's the thing about that. People will do that, right? They'll tailor their message, they'll tone it down. They won't say it as sharp or as harsh or as without reservations as they might want to say it. But at the end of the day, once all the bold churches are attacked, like they're coming after all the other ones as well. Like that's the goal. That's the goal of the left. That's the goal of these demons, is that there are no churches that worship God in our country. And so like, it doesn't matter. Like if you decide right now, like, we're not on the front lines, we're not saying anything like that spicy or whatever. Like if you literally just preach the Bible, like you're going to get opposition.
Yeah, there might be someone who's saying these things with a little more verve right now, and so they're the ones that are taking the flack. But in reality, they hate you too.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, like, this is the thing. We get this opposition online all the time. It's like, why are you guys so concerned with training or physicality or strength and conditioning or whatever it is? Like, don't you know that we're in a spiritual war? We're warring against, powers and principalities. And you're like, yes, that's the point. The way that these powers and principalities communicate and exert force is in the physical temporal world that we live in.
Yeah.
It happens by protesters showing up at your front door armed and waving Antifa flags, or barging into the middle of your church service on Sunday morning in Minneapolis, or drawing a shotgun like we talked about in the cold open and shooting one of your deacons in the middle of a service while it's being live streamed online. Like that is the kind of thing that is a part of the spiritual warfare. So we have to be equipped there as well. It's not saying that we shouldn't be praying about these things or that you shouldn't be prepared to go and meet your maker. The point is that all of it matters.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about before duties of the Sixth Commandment, duties to protect innocent life, like the duties that fathers have to protect their wives and their kids, the duties that, if you're an organization, you have to make sure that your people are safe. If you're a leader in an organization, making sure that these things exist to stand between you and the enemy. And the thing is, like, maybe it doesn't happen in your lifetime. Maybe your church isn't attacked or occupied or anything, but like the muscles that we're talking about training now will set your kids up for success, because it won't be many generations before they're in your church.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no reason to continue to try to play some sort of political game where you're going to just like convince someone with soft words that they should stop fighting against you. If you're being opposed by demons, that's not the way this works.
It doesn't matter. And I think the other main point, overarching point that I'll make is, as we're talking about this, somebody coming in with a shotgun or Antifa protesters or Don Lemon coming in your church, that's not the most likely thing that's going to happen. The most likely, around here, a homeless person on drugs comes in who shouldn't be in there, or you have somebody with a medical condition, they faint in your church, or you have a heart attack, or you have like some kind of medical thing you have to respond to. That's far more likely. And so we're obviously talking broadly about being prepared, Sunday worship service or whatever else you have going on in your building. And you want to be prepared for the worst, but you also have to be prepared for all the other more likely scenarios that they happen once a quarter, once a half. Like just something happens. Even kids scraping their knee and running around, like things happen, and you have to be able to deal with them.
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to deal with the more commonplace stuff, but at the same time, the thought that won't ever happen here is the reason that places that used to be solid red and like the bastion of conservatism are now being completely eroded away because we've told ourselves for so long that those things won't ever happen here. We won't let that happen. They won't let that happen. And then they begin to happen and no one does anything because you just keep repeating the same mantra over and over, no matter how untrue it is. And so it's important to actually take this stuff seriously, but we could just beat that drum forever. So we'll kind of get into some more of the more practical stuff.
Yeah, I think maybe starting with like the philosophy of preparedness, and this applies in the home and in the workplace and in your vehicle and all those things is like, we talk about equipment, we talk about training. You have to have the things in order to use them. You have to know how to use the things. When the time comes, it's not enough just to buy the med kit. You actually have to have a little bit of training on CPR or stopping, blood loss or whatever the case is. But at the end of the day, I think that what we're talking about is having a team of guys. The principle that men are better than gates, physical security matters. We'll hit on that too. But having men that you trust. This is one of those brotherhoods. This is one of those organizations where like you actually have to know the people, trust the people, train with the people, and give them the equipment and the training that they need to be effective for whatever the scenario is.
Yeah. Having a team of guys that's actually just even capable of filling this duty, I think is really important. I mean, in the cold open, the 3 guys that were involved from the church were all 61 or older. Like the guys that were shot were 61 and 67, I think. And the guy who responded and killed the shooter was 71 years old. And he made a good shot. He made one shot. It was a clean shot. He did his job. But it's just one of those things where you're kind of looking around going like, where are all the young men? Like, where are all the young men that are fighting age men that should be defending a place like that? Are they even there? Where are they? And that was, I watched that video earlier, and that's the first thing that popped in my head was like, where are all the guys my age or younger that ought to be moving towards the sound of gunfire in that scenario? But
yeah, and this was it Texas?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason, so as we're talking about doing this episode, the reason why that one came to mind is because I have a image burned in my mind because of their security cameras, or maybe it was like a live stream.
Yeah,
but
they were live streaming the service.
You can find this video online.
Yeah,
and you can look at it and debrief it, and I'm sure there's things that could have been better. Obviously, like in any scenario, you have two of the friendlies die. Right, they were killed.
Yeah. For sure, one of them was. The other may have just been wounded, but I know for sure one of them.
So, like, there's always ways to critique it, and that's not necessarily the point. But looking at it and saying this is a random church in
near Fort Worth, like it's just
like not a big church,
no,
not a huge online presence,
no,
and so point being like it could happen anywhere, and looking at it and saying like, okay, if that's our church, how do we stop that guy from dying?
Yeah, absolutely. How do we stop that threat before it gets there? In that, to use that as an example, this is something that we talk about a lot, is just identification. As soon as someone walks through the door, is that someone you've seen numerous times, they've been a member here for years, or is it someone who's brand new and they're just checking things out? We have people visiting all the time from all over the country. We have people come from other countries to visit the church. So we're just constantly going, all right, do we know who that is? Do they look like they belong here? Do they fit the mold? Or are they sticking out like a sore thumb? Are we paying attention to that? We have someone on duty whose whole role this morning is to have their eyes trained on that. And you could tell, even from the very blurry, grainy video in that church, that guy does not look like everyone else in that church. He comes in with like a graphic black big hoodie on, and everyone else is dressed in church clothes. He sticks out. He's had some prior issues before. He's been given food and then asked for money and been told no and got angry about it. Like, there are just things that stick out, especially for me now, having been in our recent context where I'm going, we would have someone shadowing that guy.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the emphasis items for our team here locally is the security team, however many guys are on it on any given Sunday, they're not your primary evangelists. They, we have lots of people who can do evangelism, and the security team is not it.
Yeah.
So they're the ones who are looking for people who don't recognize, right? We don't have a huge church, and so most of the guys are like, they know, have I seen that guy before? Do I see him in the chats? Do I recognize him or not? And you know what? If they go up to somebody, introduce themselves, and check them out, and turns out this guy's been a member for 6 months. Like, so what? You met a new member of your church.
Yeah,
like, it's not a big deal. But if the opposite happens, and it's somebody who isn't supposed to be there, or a bad actor, or nefarious, then you have identified that, you've communicated it to the rest of the guys on your team via chat, radios. Right? We'll talk about equipment, but that's a much better scenario. And so, like, just basically letting the guys be security, and not worry about evangelism, right? And if evangelism needs to happen, and there's somebody who's new and like, I just want to pray with somebody, you know what? We have pastors for that. We have deacons. We have plenty of people who they can direct them to do that, but they're not the ones who need to be doing that.
And so I can already hear like the cacophony of responses that are going, well, the priesthood of all believers, and isn't someone coming to Christ more important than your own personal safety, and all of these very Gnostic responses that basically are going, your own life today doesn't matter as much as that person's soul for eternity. And there's some grain of truth in there, and so it's actually a very pernicious problem to have to address. But why is that principle of your security team is not there on Sunday for evangelism? Why is that so important?
Well, I think it just comes down to roles and responsibilities. You've got a dedicated team that knows I'm on duty, and I am protecting the people, the members of the church and their families, and I know what my job is, and I know what it's not. And the thing is, it's a false dichotomy to say, well, if I'm not an evangelist, that person, they can direct them to somebody else. They can say, hey, have you met, so-and-so, and let somebody else take that and talk to them and share the gospel with them and whatever you want. But at the end of the day, if they take 10 minutes or 15 minutes or any time at all, having a one-on-one conversation about, have you given your life to Jesus, then their focus is now on that person and not the rest of the church. And so, you have a limited number of guys, you have a certain size building. You can't take a guy out of the lineup. You can't take him off his duty. He's got to know he's got the freedom to do his job, and then be able to basically triage, the problems and direct people to the right people or to somebody who's not him, and let him take care of that.
I also think this is a downstream issue that comes from that really, really heavy like revivalism, evangelism movement that we've theologically dressed down before in other podcasts. But this is one of the downstream effects of it, is that many congregants think that their churches are for people who are not Christians.
Primarily, what are we doing on Sunday? Evangelism.
Trying to get people saved.
That's not what church is.
That's not what we're here to do.
Yeah, we're here to worship God with the saints.
With the saints.
With the body of believers. And evangelism is it happens, right?
For sure.
People walk in the door who have never been to church before, people hear the gospel preached, like that is a side effect of worshiping God with the body of believers. But that's not, if you think primarily what are we here to do is evangelism, like that's not what a Sunday service is.
Correct. And so one of the, like I said, like the downstream effect of that is that you can justifiably have guys who are there who their only responsibility is to protect that body of believers as they worship, because that is the primary focus of Sunday morning. If some evangelism takes place, that's great. We're all for it. We're not against it, but that's not why we showed up on Sunday morning. That's not why my family is there, to try to get other people saved. We're there to be sanctified. We're there to worship the one and true God, and that is the primary focus. And so I think that's really important to have the principles and the why behind this down pat, because everything comes back to theology at some point. And so having that bedrock be really solid for why we can do this and why we're justified in defending this body of believers and being righteous in doing it is really important.
And I think the same is true. It can be said about the protesters, the Don Lemon, the Minnesota thing. It's like, there is a certain kind of Christian that says, isn't it great that, these people came in and isn't that a great evangelism opportunity? Isn't it great they moved all these Pakistanis here and they brought the foreigner to you and you can share the God. Like, isn't that great? It's like, it also like misunderstands what are we doing. One, it's a very feeble and misunderstanding of who these people are and what they're here to do. They're not here to hear the gospel.
They're not here to be evangelized.
No, they're not here to be evangelized. They're not good actors, and not wasting your time sharing the gospel with somebody who doesn't have ears to hear it is not a sin.
Someone isn't barging into your church to protest your position on immigration so that they can hear the gospel.
No.
That's not why they showed up. They're not good faith actors. They're not there to have a fair and even dialogue. None of that is the case. So understanding the frame that you're actually in is really important here.
Yeah, and not treating all people equally, like they're all equally, good soil that, they just need to hear John 3:16. Like, no, like they've heard it. They don't care. They hate God.
Yeah.
And they're here because they hate God. They want to disrupt your service, and we can talk about all the different scenarios, but in that one specifically, that's a misunderstanding and really just, I think, a naive framework to viewing people where, they're actually not here for any good reason.
And so church security is extremely important. You really do have people showing up that are there for no good reason. They're there for adverse reasons. And so this is really important.
And they don't have a right to be there. I think coming back to like, what are the laws? What does the Constitution grant me? What are our local, state, federal, what are these laws? It's a church. It's a private organization. It's a 501c3. You don't have to open your doors to anybody just because they say they want to be there. Like, it's, your security team actually does have the authority to say you may be here or you may not, and you need to leave. And if you don't leave, we're going to trespass you. Like that, like knowing the local laws and knowing your local authorities, who to call, who's the closest, who's going to respond, developing that relationship with those guys so they know you're normal people, and when you pick up the phone, they're not like, oh, these guys again or whatever. Like, I think all of those things are super important, but just again, the freedom to exercise these rights that you have, knowing what they are and knowing you don't have to just like, well, we're a church and you're a church. You're not a public bathroom.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was one of the more steep learning curves for me through the last 4 to 5 months, is knowing that you actually can just turn people away just because we said so. And I don't have to give you some justifiable reason. You don't have any recourse in this situation. This is the same as if someone was barging into your personally owned business.
Or your house. You treat it like your house. Like, that was the analogy we used the last time we did training, was like, think about your home. And if somebody knocked on the door and said, I really need to use your bathroom, you'd be like, get off my porch.
Yeah.
And it'd be the same thing where it's like, if somebody doesn't look like they should be there, you get these red flags of they're talking, saying weird things or acting weird or dressed strangely. Then those red flags go up. I would rather turn away somebody and not let them just like come in and use the bathroom or whatever they're here to do, rather than expose our family to a threat.
Yeah. I think practicing that particular skill, even of doing it at your house, because I immediately imagined that scenario, and you just know so many guys who would not even feel comfortable turning someone away from their own door and not exerting a steel spine and going, no, you can't come in my house. I don't care how bad you have to use the restroom. Go somewhere else.
Yeah, there's a 7-Eleven down the street. They have a public bathroom.
You're not coming in my house.
For customers.
Guys. Like,
even 7-Eleven. You have to buy something, right? Buy gas.
Yeah.
You have to buy something. It's not a public bathroom. So like, we can at least be on the level of 7-Eleven where we say, no, like, this is for church members. This is for Christians. You're not either of those things. You have no place here.
Yeah. I think practicing that skill is so important. We did that a little bit in one of our recent trainings where we're running through scenarios and having to just exert the verbal spine of going, no, you're not allowed here. You need to leave. And it's something that so many guys have just, I know especially in my generation, have just been in so few real confrontations where they've had to exert themselves that way. And it's worth practicing. So where do you want to go from there? Some other objectives?
Yeah, objectives. So I think overall we're talking about putting together a team, an actual list. These are the guys who are on the team. These are guys who aren't. We'll talk about like how to vet guys and train them and test them and make sure they qualify and things like that. But overall, I think the big picture is, as you're thinking through training, how do we make sure our guys are prepared for different scenarios? You think through most likely course of action, most dangerous course of action. Most likely are the things that happen all the time, right? If it were here, it'd be somebody fainting because they have a heart condition. It'd be somebody who, has a medical issue. It'd be a kid who fell down and scraped his knees on the rocks and needs a Band-Aid. It would be most likely somebody who came in, a homeless person came in off the street, and they don't really want to be there. They're just, casing the church to see what they can steal and come back later. Like those are the things that happen regular enough where you can say these are most likely course of action.
And I think for a lot of people, especially if you live in a place like I did prior to moving here, you're like, that doesn't happen. But I literally, in the last handful of months, have come up to the church because we saw someone on the cameras who broke in and had to like basically walk in and find this person and go, you have to get out.
And trespass them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like the most likely thing is going to change based on your context and location and all those things. But for us, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then you also have to think through what is the most dangerous thing that could happen on a Sunday morning with 150 people here, or like, 150 families here. What is the most dangerous thing? It's kind of like the cold open or, something like that, where it's a bad actor coming in to hurt somebody or take your things. And, and that's, everybody's most dangerous course of action is probably the same kind of thing, right? It's like an active shooter. Is it likely? Probably not. But I think part of the training and the thought process, you have to think through, if somebody comes in with a gun, if two people come in with a gun, how are we going to stop that threat and protect our people?
Yeah. I think one of the other things about having an assigned security team that I would want to point out as far as like just principles goes is, to your point of we're not here for evangelism. There's a particular purpose to this. And I just thought about it. We have 2 services right now, and Lord willing, we'll go back to one hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, if you guys know anybody who wants to donate like $10 million, $20 million, where we can buy a new building, just info at New Christian Press. We'd love to chat with them.
I would love to talk to you personally. We've got lots of stuff that you could spend money on. But until that happens, we're in 2 services. The guys who are on security are not participating in the service that they're serving security for.
Right.
They're there for security.
By design.
By design, on purpose. And so they actually attend the other service with their families and participate and are there to worship. And then in the other service, they're on security. And that's all they're doing is they're on security.
Which obviously every church is different. If you have one service, then by necessity, that guy is not in the service. Then you want to have a big enough team where you can rotate guys through so it's not every other week somebody's missing church to provide security. Like,
correct.
If it were, I don't know, if it were me, once every 2 months, once every 3 months, you could find enough guys where it doesn't have to be a regular thing where you're always pulling them out of church. Like you don't want to set that up, and you want to prioritize you want to prioritize the Lord's service and what we're here for. And so that is one emphasis item we do for our guys is like, if you're on first service security, then you need to go to second service with your family or vice versa.
Yeah. I think that's really important. I think next thing here that you have on objectives, you mentioned knowing local laws, being connected with local law enforcement. You mentioned like getting to know those guys and make sure they know that you're not some sort of cult freak show going on. We have a couple of guys who are on the sheriff's department, and that was some of the most common feedback that we got is, guys from the Ogden Police Department visiting, meeting us, meeting some of the guys who were on security, and then going back to the office and basically saying like, man, those guys are not near as strange as we had been told that they are, which is always a refreshing thing to hear back. But you don't have any idea what the outside world's, perception of you might be. If you're a Bible-believing church and, I don't know, you have women showing up in head coverings or, whatever your weird
something
thing is.
Crazy like
something
that.
Insane. Then there's no telling what the local law enforcement has heard about you from other people. And so even if this is like the sleepiest town in the middle of nowhere, knowing who's on local law enforcement, meeting those guys, setting up, something where you can meet them and kind of discuss security around the building is still worth doing.
Bring them lunch, something like that where you build. And we did this kind of out of necessity once all the protests started this fall, and we got to know them and started developing relationships, and got a lot of good feedback on how our guys interacted with the protesters, and the cops were pleased with us, and they were really annoyed they had to be there at all because of these, Antifa protesters. But if I could do it again, I would have backed it up and developed those relationships first. So when you pick up the phone and say, "Hey, there's a protest meeting at the library. Can we get some support from your guys?" Like they know who you are, and you're not a stranger, and it's not weird. So that would be the only thing I would do different if I could go back this year.
Yeah, that's really good. Next thing you have on here is who should be on your team. What's the criteria that you're looking for in a security team member?
Well, on some level, you like who has God put in
what's available?
Yeah, you can look at your congregation, your members. One, you have to be a member, right? You have to be in covenant with these people. I wouldn't have anybody who's like a brand new guy, a brand new member. Like, you want to get to know them and get to know their families. Like, it actually does matter. You can't just like you don't want the guy who is losing control quickly, not having self-control. You want a guy who, it's level-headed, things like that. And you can only really know that and vet guys over time.
Mm-hmm.
But on some level, you're stuck with whoever you have as members of your church. But I would be primarily, one, I'd make it invite only. Like, it's not just because I want to be on the security team, I get to be on the security team. Like, if you have that luxury to say, well, it's invite only, we'll have tryouts at, in the fall or something like that. But like having a standard, usually that involves a couple things. One would be these guys are dedicated enough to show up to training when you have training. You don't want to have to be like, I've got 26 guys on my team and half of them show up to training. You want as close to 100% participation, because you can't, it's not law enforcement, it's not the military. You can't just be training all the time. Like, you're limited on how much you actually can get everybody together to train. But when you do, you want guys who are dedicated enough to actually show up and participate.
Yeah, they see the importance of it. They're willing to put in the time and the energy and the effort to make sure that it's done well.
But beyond that, if guys have backgrounds in any of these things, law enforcement, which can be hard because guys, are on duty, certain times. But if you've got law enforcement background, nurses, doctors with medical background that can train your guys on that kind of stuff. If you've got military guys, ex-military guys, they can be helpful. And again, they're not all created equal, right? And like, not just because somebody's in the military doesn't make them, SEAL Team 6.
Right.
But they've had some firearms training, likely. They've had some medical training, likely. So guys like that it would be where I would prioritize my time. But at the end of the day, if a guy carries, is proficient, trains, seems to be well put together, not quick to anger, guys like that, you want to at least invite and try them out.
Yeah, it's really good. All right. As far as standards, you mentioned a tryout. This is something that we've been working on, is kind of standardizing the entry point for guys and going, this is just important. Like, this is another characteristics that I think is somewhat unique here, is the willingness to just be hierarchical, even in things like this. It's not a invite everyone. Like, if you just have the whim and decide you want to be on the security team, it doesn't mean you're on the security team. And we literally, I've walked into a new member meeting or a new member class recently that Ryan Portman was teaching, where he's explaining, just because you are proficient, you might be the best shooter in the church. Just because you show up with a gun on Sundays, though, does not mean that you're on the security team. And you're expected to behave like you are or are not on the security team based on whether that's true, right?
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, given the size of our church, we have a large number, like pretty large number of guys on the team, but they're not all on duty at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
That said, if there was an event that happened, I would expect those guys to respond first, right? But we also train our church in quarterly member meetings and in the new member class of, if there's a problem, your primary job is like getting down in the pew and protecting your family. everybody in the church carry, all the men in the church carry. If you have an active shooter and 46 guys pop up and try to take out the threat, you're going to have a lot more casualties from crossfire than you would, if you just let this guy empty his gun, and so really driving that home with the membership. We have this team, they're well trained, they're training regularly, they're proficient. Let them handle it, right? And that could be even a medical scenario. I don't need the whole church crowding around this woman who fainted and trying to give assistance. Like, there are a couple people who have had training, and those are the ones you want responding, not everybody at the same time.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
That kind of reminds me of another objection I've heard from time to time of like, do you guys have a security team? No, we don't have like an official team, but like everybody in our church carries. All the men in our church carry, and so like I think we'll be fine. There's a couple problems with that. One, same thing where you're like, who's on duty, who's distracted. If you're on duty, I can't have these personal, private conversations for 10 minutes like I would on a normal Sunday. People love each other. They want to catch up. They want to see how their week was. But if you're on security, you can't afford to do that because your attention is drawn away from being vigilant on what you should be doing. Same thing is like the hierarchy, the training schedule, things like that. Like, you need to have somebody in charge of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
They have the hammer to say, you're on my team or you're not on my team. You met the standard. You didn't meet the standard. You were supposed to do 6, on your own trainings and 6 dry fire, over the course of the year, and you didn't do that. You're not on the team anymore. Like, you need somebody with actual authority, delegated from the session to make those hard calls. And we've had to, in some situations, make difficult calls. But, at the end of the day, it's not it can't be a hurt feelings thing where you're like, I don't want to hurt.
It's not a feel good club. No, that's not the point of it.
It's not a book group that's like open the whole church.
Yeah.
It is selective. There are standards, and if you can't maintain those standards, then you're a bigger threat to the church than if you stay on the team than if I kick you off of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just because everyone in the church is carrying does not mean that you have a security team. Scheduling and planning, you kind of mentioned there that there has to be someone who is coordinating and running things. There has to be an authority figure who actually has the power to make these calls. You and then also Jason work really closely together. He does a lot of the scheduling and stuff, but you guys both organize the trainings, and then obviously he's communicating with you quite a bit about like, what do we need to do? How do we need to do it? So how important do you think that is to have, maybe even counterparts, more than one guy if possible, who is on top of stuff like this so that you have redundancy?
Well, I do think at the end of the day, Jason is the head of security, and he has to be. Like, you can't have like multiple heads and trying to make decision by committee. Like, I think, he may not be the best at medical, but he knows a guy, who gets trained on medical, quite frequently because he's a cop or he's a nurse or something like that. And so like, he leans on other guys who are subject matter experts in their field to come in and train everybody else. Here's how to use the AED. Here's how to do CPR. Here's how to, stop when you're hemorrhaging blood, and so I think that is really important to be able to lean on those guys or figure, if you don't have them, figure out how do we get our guys trained on these things that are really critical. If our guys have no training and no background in this, how do we keep them qualified and current? Do we need to bring in the Red Cross and have them teach, bring in the Michael Scott dummy and do a CPR training? Like, there are things available to you. Do I need to find a local range? Maybe there is nobody who's, super proficient and like a firearms instructor kind of guy. Is that something that we can pay for it? Can the church pay for it? And, that gets into all kinds of stuff. Like, can the church buy targets, or can the church have, we bought training guns, right? So when we do scenario training, we have these blue rubber guns or knives, things like that are helpful equipment, so that you can actually have good training and get your guys up to speed.
Yeah, that's good. I just had something else that I was trying to think. I am going to forget what it is now, but
I think the other thing on like the scheduling planning,
yeah,
kind of.
Oh, that's what it was. Go ahead.
It is, every team's going to be different. Needs are going to be different, but at least once a quarter, I think you need to get your guys together and do some kind of training.
Mhm.
I think at a minimum once a year in terms of a live fire qualification, our guys, when they're not all together, are they doing enough training on their own to maintain that proficiency, whatever that is, right? And I think you could pick a drill, like a bill drill, a certain time, certain hit score, but maybe it's something more suited to like your actual building. Maybe, you've got a really long, skinny building. You might have to take a 40-yard shot. Like maybe that's, a better, whatever. But there has to be some kind of thing. And then beyond that, medical at least once a year, right? Going over what's the equipment we have. Do we remember how to use it? Actually, not just like academic PowerPoint, but hands-on medical training where guys are ripping open tourniquets and putting on pressure dressings and figuring out like how to do this kind of stuff. And because they're all perishable skills. If you're not doing it, if it's not your job, you're gonna forget.
Yeah, for sure.
And then so a live fire, a medical training, some kind of scenario based training, which we're going to talk about in the after hours here. We just did this recently with our team, kind of how we did that. And then the other one would be some kind of like hands on. Maybe it's more like we're wearing shorts and we're going to roll around a little bit on the mats or do something like that, but some kind of hands-on thing where you can practice if I need to grab a guy and help him leave, or if
physically escort him out of the church.
Yeah, or if somebody wants to start wrestling and trying to grab your gun, or somebody wants to start throwing punches, like, once a year you at least had some kind of like recency on that kind of training.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that's really important for guys, period, but especially if you're going to be on the security team.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the rest of it, we haven't got there yet, but something that I think is coming locally would be kind of like a spreadsheet with your training, and making a requirement. Once every 2 months, you need to go to the range and shoot 50 rounds. Once every month, you need to do, an hour of dry fire, or whatever it is. And just having guys know you got to do this on your own. Check it off when you've accomplished it. But that just basically encouraging guys, when you're not all together, continue honing skills.
Yeah, it's really important. The thing that I was going to mention is that we use the services application to organize all of this stuff. So we schedule people in advance. There are profiles built in for all the people, and we use this across the board, practically for
all volunteers.
All volunteers at the church.
Set up on Sunday, psalm singing, clean up, communion
setup, all of that stuff. Everything is run. Each of those different categories has a team lead who has been assigned to that. They are the ones who organize and schedule it and make sure that everything is done properly. That way you don't have just a giant group text. Well, at least at our scale, where there's 150 people in there and they're all volunteers, but then you go, hey, I need someone for this tomorrow morning, and 14 people respond to it, kind of a thing. Instead, we have this systematized where we schedule it out in advance, and the security team works exactly the same way.
And then I don't know if people like that app or not, but the nice thing is you put in your availability or the days you're not available. Oh, I'm going to be out of town that Sunday, so you block that day out, and they know not to schedule you for it. So it eliminates a lot of the like night before. Hey, I can't be there. Can somebody take my spot? So that's kind of nice.
The stuff like that is the kind of stuff that I don't naturally think about when I'm, thinking about putting together something like a security team and, just kind of working through it in my head. But it's the kind of logistical stuff that you have to have in place, or things very quickly fall apart. And you went from, we had, 4 or 5 guys who were supposed to be on duty to now we've got 2,
Yep.
because someone got sick, or, we scheduled someone when they weren't actually available for scheduling. So I think that stuff's really, really important.
Yeah. I think the next thing would be, what is the min equipment list for your security team? I think standardizing that so that everybody has the same equipment. So things to think about would be like, obviously you have to have a handgun. Probably would make guys have an extra magazine, right? Because you're not standardizing. Everybody's not carrying a Glock 19 or Glock 17. I know how many rounds they have, but you could get, hey, I need you to have a double stack 9. You could tell people, I need you can't carry your 6-shooter.
Yeah.
You can't carry your Desert Eagle with 6 rounds in it or whatever. Like, some kind of standard for like, at least everybody has, 35 rounds on them or 30 rounds. I think something like that would be a good standard. A light, so guys carrying a flashlight, especially in our building, lots of dark corners and crevices and things like that, so that's important. Radio, so church owns a bunch of these UHF, VHF, Baofeng ham radios. They're really cheap. They work surprisingly well. You can find frequencies that you can use on these radios that you don't need a license for, like MERS frequencies, for example. So lots of things. You can go down that whole rabbit trail, but basically the point being, you have to be able to communicate with one another. We all use earpieces for the security team so that you're not disturbing the service and guys can communicate with each other. You have to have your phone on you. We have a Signal app where all the security team is on there. And I think that's really important because there are things that happen any Sunday, and it might be a non-event, but being able to communicate things like, hey, this guy showed up again and I told him he had to leave and he left. If there's a picture, things people can recognize so that the guy who wasn't on security that week, it's like when he shows back up, it's like, I recognize you. You got trespassed last week. You got to go.
Yeah.
We obviously, we have security cameras at the church. So something like a power over Ethernet security camera, and then iPads so that you can monitor these things. And so breaking down the team, so you might have somebody at the front door, somebody in the sanctuary, maybe you have a guy who is a dedicated iPad guy who is heads down for the most part, looking at the whole building at the same time, because you can have these 9 or 12 different screens. You can open them up to get a bigger thing. But something like that is really a force multiplier, because rather than have a guy in every room in your building or roving around where you're not in one place at any one time, you can kind of have a guy, have that eye in the sky with the security cameras. I think that's really helpful if you can afford that. We have guys carry knives on them, and then I don't know that this is a standard, but something that makes sense to me is like, if I'm on security, I would not wear a tie.
It makes sense to me.
Like, you guys dress up on Sunday and you wear your coat and cover your gun, and but I would not wear a tie, because like if somebody's getting in a wrestling match on a Sunday, it's you're one of the top 3 or 5 guys who that is, and so I would not give whoever you're wrestling another opportunity to pull
to go ahead and tie the noose around my neck before we start wrestling.
Exactly. And then beyond that, we have our guys, we give them all security team pins. So ours are really simple, like it's like a Jerusalem cross shield, and only the security team wears those. But that way that guy's on security, and you can tell, right? They might have an earpiece in, or they might be like standing off and not, just monitoring the situation. But having some kind of identifiable emblem, like a pin, I think lets everybody know. Our members know we have a security team. He's on duty. It might even be a helpful reminder, like, hey, Tate's on security this week. I see his pin. I'm not going to just bog him down with a conversation because I know he's got a job to do.
Right.
Or, hey, I've got a problem. Granny fell down the stairs. Hey, I see you're on security this week. Can you come help? So it kind of has that identifiable just marker where you can have help if you need it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really good. Already addressed that.
Concealed carry permit would be the other one.
Oh yeah.
Depending on the laws, depending on the,
where you're at,
you might need all your guys to get a concealed carry permit. So on your roster, that might be a good thing to keep track of for the leader of the team to know, I've got this guy, he's got a concealed carry permit, expires in 2030, and just making sure all those things stay current as the laws, kind of require.
Yeah. Cool. I think that kind of covers the majority of what we're trying to do, what we're looking for in members, and then what we're expecting of them on Sunday mornings. Next, let's move into kind of some of the pitfalls and some of the things that we've learned along the way since we started doing this. What are some of the issues that you've found in guys staying vigilant, or just things that we didn't think about and then encountered because of, a personal experience or whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is you're dealing with volunteers, right? This isn't, nobody got drafted.
Yeah.
Nobody's,
no one signed a contract.
Yeah. And so like with any of these programs or things, like you're dealing with volunteers. So that can be a difficulty, especially in something as important as security, where you really want to vet them to begin with, make sure they're guys who are, their yes means yes, their no means no. They've got a backbone. They're going to show up when you say show up. They're going to train. They're going to be proficient. So I think just if you pick the right guys first, rather than try to get rid of bad apples, that's a lot better. We talked about distractions. So things we emphasize are like not getting into a bunch of personal conversations on Sunday morning when you're on duty, chatting. I don't want guys missing church. So I don't want them just showing up with their families while they're on security and missing church as much as it can be helped. And then I think the things that we trained most recently are just some of those. You don't want guys who are conflict averse. You want guys who are willing to have an awkward conversation, willing to approach somebody that they don't think looks right or has some red flags. You don't want timid guys. You want to give them the authority and the ability to do their job. The other ditch would be somebody who's overly aggressive. And, you don't want a guy that's going out and picking a fight or escalating a situation that could be de-escalated. So, overall, you want guys who are going to de-escalate something, resolve it, pull the problem to the side, ask them to leave. But you don't want the kind of caricature of like a young hothead that's like going to get things spun up and make them worse than they already are.
Right.
You don't want guys like that.
Yeah, you want guys that are mature, but you also want guys that are like you said, not timid, which I think is probably the larger pitfall for our culture right now, is finding guys who are willing to assert themselves and disagree with someone and have a conflict at all. I mean, even here, running through the scenarios, that is the problem more often than someone being way too aggressive at the gate.
Yeah.
Is going, no, that was the time for you to step in the gap right there and go, no, you can't come in. And
you got to go.
You have to leave.
Shutting the door, whatever.
Yeah. It's that tends to be the more trainable thing, which in all honesty is probably a good thing. A lot of the time, you probably don't want a whole congregation of guys who are just looking for a fight all the time. That pretty much shouts immaturity. But it is something that you do have to kind of train and work on. And you want guys who have at least the capability of being able to exercise that, seeing the moment for what it is, knowing the time that they're in, and knowing when to step up and bow the chest a little bit. Yeah,
same thing. Like we talked about, even just shouting. If you could prevent a bad situation by raising your voice and yelling, "Hey, stop!" or something like that. We have one of our firearms trainers that will, like, when he's out on the range, will have guys practice, before, kind of like the scenario where it's like, put your gun down, let me see your hands. And like, people have a really hard time in that on the range, at no threat other than people watching you, actually raising their voice and saying something that might prevent somebody from getting shot.
Yeah. I mean, it made me think of us going on the FTX last year. And at one point, Joe Forty was running drills with a bunch of boys, and they were set up in fire teams, and they were assaulting a position. And he was just having them. We didn't have guns in their hands at the time, so they had like sticks or whatever, and he's just having them yell bang, 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 bang as they're shooting, quote unquote. And you could tell, like, right at first, they're all just kind of like whispering. Yeah. But by the end of it, they had kind of gotten used to raising their voices like that. But in civilized, polite society, you're just not doing that very often.
Which is funny, because 5 years ago, these boys would have been saying bang, bang in the backyard every day.
At the top of their lungs. But when you get
to be 15, 16 years old, you're like, oh, this is embarrassing.
Yeah. So, we even talked about that in that particular training, is like actually practicing, like, raising your voice and speaking authoritatively. So,
I think maybe the last thing that we haven't covered yet is just, and this wouldn't be an exhaustive list, but things to consider is for equipment purposes. Mm-hmm. Obviously, physical security is important. You don't want people breaking into your building when nobody's there. So having
good locks, making sure everything locks up tightly, is not going to just be rattled open. And
the cameras help with that too, right? You can a lot of these cameras, you can set motion detection so that if somebody's in the building after hours, somebody gets an alert. Maybe your head of security gets an alert. Other things like physical security, if you have no trespass signs, then you could see somebody trespassing on your property, on the church's property, you don't have to tell them anything. You've already told them with the sign, no trespassing, and you can call the cops and trespass them right then. They'll respond. The cops are going to say, well, did you tell them to leave? Well, no, I'm not there. Well, my sign told them to leave, and they're trespassing. So go, do your job.
Yeah.
So there's that. We talked about cameras. We talked about, iPads to view the cameras. A lot of these cameras you can view on cell phones if you give different logins to people. I think the two big things. So radios, right? We talked about how important it is to be able to communicate with your guys who are on duty and not disturb the rest of the church. So having radios, having earpieces, I think is something that's very low cost, but it gives you a huge advantage.
And maybe you're not in that context just yet. I think that's something that everyone should be trying to work towards. But I was just going to point out, we have that security team chat. All of the pastors are also in that so that they can be aware of what's going on. So even if someone is up preaching and they're in the middle of a sermon, they can get alerts while they're up there. Because we've had situations where, people have walked in and we have them shadowed, but still you're going, if they're in the position that they're seated in right now and they decide that they want to stand up, pull a gun and point it at Brian while he's preaching, it's going to be difficult for someone to respond quickly enough to stop that threat. And so for Brian to be somewhat aware of that is actually kind of important, and for him to be prepared if he needs to move and innovate and get out of the way. And so just on that communication point, it's important to make sure that communication is going to all of the authority figures in the church as well as the security team, I think.
Yeah, or even think about the situation where you have somebody who comes in, I want you to pray for me. That's not the security team guy's job. But if you put something in the chat or grabs a pastor and notifies him, maybe, one of the 6 or 7 pastors can go over and help deal with that situation, and the security guy can go back to doing his job.
I think this is another point where we need to emphasize the importance of your pastors also being as physically capable and responsible as possible, because all of our guys are also prepared to respond to a threat. And so we're not calling someone up in that scenario. Someone comes in, they seem sketchy, but they say the right words and they're like, I just want somebody to pray with me. Well, the security team guy shouldn't be the one getting down and bowing his head and closing his eyes when there are threats present. And so maybe he calls a pastor forward. You don't want to call someone who is a defenseless sheep up into the middle of that situation. You want the guy that you call to be someone who's also capable and is going to be an asset rather than a liability in the situation, which puts the impetus on pastors to be prepared and ready physically.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, and that's a cultural thing, I think. I might have said it before. When a new person, father moves here with his family, comes to our church, one of the first calls I get within about 3 weeks is, hey, I don't own any guns. I need a Glock 19. It happens like clockwork.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody is shaming this guy, telling him, dude, you're a fag, you don't have a gun. Like there's never a conversation that's had, but
it's just the social pressure.
Just the culture is one that is very pro defense, pro protecting innocent life, pro being prepared. And so you don't have to say anything, but building that culture out where guys, it hasn't been very long, but I don't know a single guy in the church that doesn't carry.
I mean, having a culture where all the men look and act like men and are not ashamed of that and are actually very pro and for it is a huge help to other guys that show up. Even if they're already doing a good job, they realize that they have all of these gaps. I mean, I definitely felt that way when I got here. I was like, okay, I felt like I was really prepared in these particular areas, but here's some stuff that I'd never even thought about before. And so it forces you to get better. And it just another one of those additional points to find a good community, find a good church, make sure that you're going to be defending people that are worth defending, I guess, with this security team. If you're the kind of, you're in the kind of church where the security team is brought up and everyone sort of scoffs at you and acts like you're a fool for even wanting to defend the church, you might be in the wrong place.
It's kind of a losing battle to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah. But besides that, the two kind of big medical things that I think every building should have, every church building, would be an AED. And then also on the first aid side of things, I kind of divide this into two categories. You have, and I like North American Rescue. I think they make really good stuff, like professional grade stuff. It's not cheap, but it's stuff where it doesn't really expire. Or it takes a long time to expire. But it's like actually good medical equipment. It's not Temu or Amazon stuff. And so the bleeding control kit that I would recommend would be, you get this plastic case and you mount it to the wall, and it has 8 individual, basically IFAKs or like individual first aid kits. And each one has a tourniquet and chest seals and pressure dressing and quick clot and, all these things that you would need. And the point is, if you had some kind of mass casualty event, the worst case scenario where you had a shooter and you've got multiple people down with gunshot wounds bleeding out, you don't have just one med kit where you're going from like person to person. And probably most people live in a place where first responders are not that far away, but like, those 10 minutes, you could save somebody's life, or they could die if you can get a tourniquet on that thing or stop the bleeding or get a chest seal. And so I think having something like that in every building is really important. Again, most dangerous course of action. I won't be surprised if we never use it and our kids never use it and it just collects dust, but you'd rather have and not need it. And then the AED would be the other one, especially, cardiac events with all the shots and vaccines and all the things, like more and more common. I don't know if I told you, so the military, you have to take a PT test. I don't know what it is now. It used to be once a year if you get like a good enough score.
Mm-hmm.
They started bringing out AEDs to the track for it was a 1.5 mile run.
Yeah.
After COVID, when they started making people get the shot.
Why would that be?
It just all of a sudden, it was never a thing before. You got these like young, 20-something people taking fitness tests that are, now having
military shape,
cardiac events. But I do think that is a common, especially older congregations. I think that is a common thing where it's like, they're not that expensive. They take like a 9-volt every year, they cost nothing to maintain. But you'd rather have it and not need it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even in our scenario training the other day, we had a few guys that raised their hands and were like, hey, I haven't messed with an AED before. Well, immediately after the training was concluded, we had someone run them through, here's how to use this thing. But like having an AED on the property is not the same as knowing how to use it. And so once again, having someone who is a designated force, who is there for protection and security, and is prepared to act in a medical scenario if needed and know what they're doing, even if it's very amateur, is way better than nothing.
Yeah.
And someone like something happens and then you look around and goes, anybody in here know how to use this thing? And like no one really speaks up. You don't want to be in that scenario. It would be better to go ahead and prepare ahead of time.
Yeah. Training. Yeah, and those things, they're like, you can get them semi-automatic, fully automatic, where like you push a button and the computer takes it away for you. Like it won't. It's not like ER where you're like clear. They're really smart and they won't shock if they don't have a shockable rhythm, and so like they're really not that hard to use. But it does take somebody to take the reins on that, get the right stuff, make sure your guys know how to use it.
Yeah, absolutely.
The only other thing I'll say is, and I do this in the truck and at home and in the church, but you have your trauma kit, but you also need a boo-boo kit. You need, a first aid kit. And I get these from North American Rescue as well. And you get whatever, they come in and then you say, and we need some Band-Aids and we need some Neosporin and we need, some aspirin or, whatever. And you add stuff to it. But something like that gets used so much more frequently. That's the one you actually have to keep stocked. Kids are always using Band-Aids and whatever. Teachers are using the Advil,
Yeah. I mean, you never know. You might have your 2-year-old decide that he's just going to dive face first off of pew and land right on his forehead right after the service is out. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had that happen. But
it's maybe once a week. And so having that, knowing where it is, at least the security team knowing where these things are, so that they're not like hidden away in a closet somewhere.
Yep. Really good point. Even the really low level stuff is still important. It still comes up, still practical, still useful. So yeah, is there anything else you wanted to cover before we move to the after hour show?
No, in the after hours, so we just did a training on Saturday.
Yeah.
So not even a week ago. And we did scenario-based training. And so basically, after action report, debrief from that training. What did we do? Why did we do that? What were the lessons learned? That's kind of what I want to cover in the after hour show. So if that's interesting to you, you want to get some ideas for your team, stick around and check that out.
3-hour-long training, really interesting. I really enjoyed it. I think it was really productive. So we'll walk through all of that in the after hour show. Thank you guys so much for hanging around. As always, thanks to our patrons. Thank you for the support. Really appreciate that. If you haven't checked out the Patreon, make sure you go do that. Also, coming up in June, the War for Normal conference here in Ogden. If you want to come hang out, if you want to come, plan a golf scramble or compete in the New Christendom Games or hear some good talks or whatever it is, Brian's going to play a concert. There's going to be a VIP mixer. There's all kinds of stuff going on.
Lots of events for hanging out, networking, socializing. I think that's my favorite. I mean, I've been to a lot of conferences, but that just ability to just spend time with people who are like-minded, and just, socialize and have community. Like, I think that's some of the best parts.
And man, the Wasatch Front is beautiful that time of year. So if you haven't been out here, it's worth making the trip. I did a handful of years ago, and it kind of ended up making me move here. So
look where you are now.
You never know. You never know what might happen. I came out here by myself, like completely solo, stayed in an Airbnb downtown by myself, just over on 24th actually. And I did not realize how beautiful Ogden was. Like there's the mountains here. There's parts of Ogden that are not beautiful, but I just had heard the guys on Kings Hall constantly talk about how much they hated it, basically. Like, I don't like living in the desert. It's, there's all of the actual societal, cultural issues here with the city.
Sanctuary city, sanctuary state.
Yeah, there's plenty of issues. But then I got here and was like, man, but there's like a 10,000-foot peak like right there. And I can drive 5 minutes and be at a trailhead and go hiking, and there's waterfalls, and it's just crazy. Some of the best skiing in the world in the winter. So
not this year.
Well, yeah, maybe not.
I know
so
you're
much
trying to
year.
upsell it.
I was just like, generally speaking, some of the best skiing. Right now, it's terrible.
No, first year I was here, we got dumped on, like record-breaking snow. I was literally skiing in waist-deep powder.
Yeah.
Like the first week we were here. It was amazing.
Man, sad I missed that.
Yeah.
Hopefully that'll come back at some point here soon. If maybe if we stop messing with the weather all the time on purpose, it'll do
tell
what
the
it's
cloud seeding guys to
chill,
knock it off.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I have no idea what I'm talking about when it comes to the weather, but this is the worst winter we've had in 60 years or something crazy.
Yeah.
So anyways, all of that to say, you should come hang out in June, which there will be no skiing going on in June. But
I don't know if you mentioned the family pass.
Oh, yeah, the family pass this year. You can buy the family pass, and your entire household is under one ticket price. It's the most affordable price that we've ever had for conference tickets. So definitely go check that out. And if you guys are going to make it out here, definitely grab us if you see us and say hi, and would love to meet you guys. Awesome.
Stay brutal.
All right. Stay frosty, fight the good fight, act like men.